Today, spacemen, we're a little lonely and maybe a little depressed because Mike's not here on a sad episode of the Manspace.
Are jellyfish symbolic of anything? Because they're kind of floating in Mike's space.
Welcome to the Manspace podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. Welcome, spacemen. Matt's getting deep. And
That's Mike's new nickname, I guess.
jellyfish.
The jellyfish.
Dude, that reminds me of... I always think of you when I think of the Mel Gibson movie.
The Beaver.
I just had to say the Mel Gibson movie.
I still haven't seen it.
The Beaver. But I never saw it either.
Yeah, I don't know what. It must not be that
It's probably not that good.
appealing.
Wasn't it like him and Jodie Foster?
I think Jodie Foster wrote it, maybe. So maybe you'll have to start off with your depression. Because The Office, I feel like we need a whole like YouTube montage of you staring longingly at the office next to you that is now vacated.
That's true. I should talk about.
Driving to the QT by yourself.
It was kind of funny driving down here this time by myself. I was like, oh, it's been like 3 years. And as I was driving down, I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. Like, I haven't listened to Malcolm Gladwell's podcast in a long time. But then I realized it's going to get real boring real fast.
That's why you stop and say hi to the folks at the Little Caesars.
Giddings.
Giddings.
I don't think it's going to take me home through Giddings.
Speaking of, I can't get the lunch special anymore. So I have to buy the double huge freaking pizza that I never finish.
What do you do with it?
I just throw it away when I get home because no one in my house can eat it. And I'm not.
You're not going to eat it the next day?
That's too much, man. Like one of those things.
Yeah, that's why I've never stopped, because Mike's like, you can't get lunch special at dinner. I was like, oh, but Matt does.
They used to give it to me, but.
Because you were special. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, it's Matt. He's unreasonably attractive.
It was the lady who
Lady.
I could never understand what she was saying. So I just kind of had to base it off of like the sequence of a normal like drive-through conversation.
I think
you just asked me what I want. So I'm going to say this.
She's probably like, how's your day? Let's just move on. I'll have the pizza, please.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have, this is kind of funny. I've thought about this many times, because today, for our listeners, we're talking about depression again, because boy, it's a big problem. But specifically, like, how do you, like, at least, I'll say at least my tips, probably yours too, of like, what do you do when you get somebody who's sitting in your office bringing this up? And I'll mention some things that Jordan Peterson said, controversial Jordan Peterson. That guy's so funny. I'm like, you guys, he's only controversial because you can tell he gets nervous when he talks.
Yeah.
Even though he doesn't sound like it. And then he says stuff, it's like, oh, he has to dial it back. And if he dials it back, it's like, it's a very reasonable response.
Yeah.
But before that, it's like, oh, Jordan. But, and actually, I always feel like Mike seems to be our resident depression expert. Not that he is depressed necessarily.
Well, he said it.
That's true, he has.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. This is what maybe I've talked about this before, probably. I feel like, I don't know if, when I look at depression, I think, I don't know if I've ever been depressed. Or, which is true for most people, I don't think my depression looks like what I thought depression would look like. Not necessarily like everybody else's, because I don't think everybody else's looks like this.
Yeah.
But I don't think it looked like what I thought it would. And I do think I identify more with the idea of burnout than I do with depression.
Yeah.
And some of the things that are around burnout tie into this depression conversation for me. But I think, so let me ask, because there's a kind of a, maybe it's a cliche assumption or joke about like, if you're a therapist who works with a lot of depressed people, that's like, don't you just get really bored and depressed yourself? Because I'm sure you've had clients that come in and they are not necessarily, but they are depressed, but they're also very quiet. And so it's a lot of like, I got to work really hard for this session to make this be something.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing I'm wondering is like, obviously depression can come from a number of places. I don't think we have to boil down like, why is somebody depressed? I don't think there's too many reasons. What would you say is the number one thing, if you could only say this is the one thing you have to go do to get out of depression? What is it?
To get out of it?
Yeah. Like, well, let me ask this first. Do you believe you can't, like, there are some people who have a narrative that's like, I am always depressed. I will always live with it. Or do you believe you can come out of it? and stay out of it, I should say. You could basically be quote unquote cured from it.
I think maybe the one thing I would say is before you can maybe answer that one is like, are you dealing with something that's like more situational depression, or is it like an episode of intense depression, or is it more like a chronic low grade?
So I think for today, I'll say let's try to focus on an episode inside of a chronic. Does that make sense? Or are you separating out? You're saying a chronic kind of dull.
Well, like depression. I've worked with people, and I would say I've worked with people where it's like, I experience more of like a functional depression.
Yeah.
In my day-to-day life. But then as soon as I'm on like, vacation, or I'm removed from my day-to-day responsibilities, all of a sudden, like, I'm jumping out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the day. I'm like, so to me, that's more like maybe a chronic but situational type of a thing. Like when I'm under these conditions. So I guess when you say an episode, like I view that more as like, I've never really felt this before. And all of a sudden, boom, like postpartum or major job loss, just all of a sudden. Yeah.
We'll rule that one out then.
The episode or
the episode.
Okay.
Because that one I think is too, that, like you say episode, to me, the way you describe it, I think, that's contextual. So a lot of times I would say, I'll talk with people about that. Like you're experiencing something that's very circumstantial, and it makes sense that you'd feel these things. And half the time,
it's almost like if you weren't depressed, I would be surprised.
Yeah. So I have to tell them half the time, like if you weren't feeling this, I think there'd be a problem.
Yeah.
So I'm going to rule that one out and focus more on the side where maybe it's like someone who's been suicidal or currently is suicidal, and has just and actually the way you described it, I thought, in my brain sometimes if they're like, man, but when I'm on vacation, I think, you might be talking about burnout. Which is, it can mimic and look like and go hand in hand with depression.
Or like boundary issues where you just, when you're around people that need things from you, you feel totally like burned out and like,
And that's also its own thing. But we can also, because to me, some of the answers in my head about what do I do with people, those would apply to both those situations, I think. So in short, if we just said the kind of chronic one, I mean, the fact that we're calling it chronic, the chronic,
kind of tells you what you need to do to get out of it.
You got to smoke the chronic. So, but I mean to say the fact that we're calling it the chronic does make it sound like, I don't have hair. Just make it sound like it is a long-term problem that cannot be solved.
Yeah.
Kind of like when people say, and there's a reason behind this with addiction, but like once an addict, always an addict kind of thing. I will always be in recovery. I never say I'm recovered. And that's, to me, that's kind of a safety thing we do, so that you don't say I'm recovered. I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah. Like I've got to have a reason to do the things that I do that keep me in a good headspace. Yeah.
So, but do you think, and I'm not saying there's a right answer to this. I think certain people would say yes and certain people would say no. Do you think depression is curable? The kind we're talking about, this kind of low grade chronic forever.
Chronic like dysthymia or something. Yeah. No, I think and I think that might be the problem, honestly. Like looking at it, like something will pull me out of this, because I've also, seen people go through a process of like getting their hopes up and a lot of motivation moving towards something that they think is going to make it different. Yeah. And then when it's not, it's like the fall is even harder. But then the only thing to do is find the next thing to be motivated by and work toward. And then like, it doesn't bring what you thought. And then
then it turns into its own kind of self-fulfilling, I will be depressed because nothing ever works.
Yeah. Like if you look at the things that would help anybody, right? Like some of the things we've talked about before, like exercise and good sleep and good diet and all of those things. Like if you're doing those because you think they're going to cure your depression,
right?
Then does that mean as soon as you're cured, you're going to stop those things? Or are these things that are just good things that you want in your life, whether you're depressed or not? So I think if I had to say one thing now that you're saying that, it is, don't look for a way out of it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But also don't assume that like, it's just going to stay the same the whole time either. Does that make sense? Like
there will always
there's
look like
improvement,
this.
there's change, there's like movement with it, but like imagining a scenario where it's there in the same difficult way nonstop for the rest of your life probably isn't helpful. And then thinking there will be a day where it's gone probably isn't helpful either.
Right.
But finding like different reasons to do the things that you're doing, if that makes sense. Like I'm not doing this. Maybe this does help me feel like I'm existing on a better plane, or I'm more connected to the people around me. Or I've realized that maybe a part of my symptoms has been serving the function of maintaining connections with people. But that doesn't work long term. So
Right.
I'm ready to like learn how to connect with people in ways that come from a place of health versus a place of sickness. Right. Like I got a question a couple weeks ago. I didn't get it personally. It was somebody posted on one of my therapy Facebook groups, but they were kind of asking like, is it possible that sometimes depression, like people might be holding on to it because that's been the only way that they've experienced people like caring about them and like trying to connect with them and understand them and empathize with them. And so the fear is like, well, when this is gone, like what are you still going to want to be with me or understanding? So am I holding on to it more because it's helping me have something that I need that I don't know how to get any other way? So yeah, I think there's a lot of different facets to it.
Yeah, and that's a tricky one. Even that last thing, I think that's hard because I don't think anybody would intentionally think that.
No, and I don't think it is like a conscious like, well, here come the people. Let me put on my depressed face. But I think it's more like when you try to
you'd feel the
when you start to move out of it. Yeah, it's like you feel like, oh crap, like you just feel this fear about being free of the thing that you're complaining about, right? Or that's hurting you. If you experience that, there's probably something to that, right? There's probably something to your attachment to that way of being that is really complicated, because on the one hand, you don't like it and you wish it was gone. But on the other hand, you don't know who you are without it, or how you would exist without it, or how you relate to people without it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a delicate conversation, but I think shying away from it and just assuming that doesn't factor into some situations, you might be missing something really important. But
I think that's what's interesting. Even as we talk about this, I think because I believe so much that people can change, I think, and because I think it's possible that you could change thinking or patterns or behaviors or whatever enough. And even like, I don't mean thinking like I woke up this morning and thought it's going to be a good day, but like a general, like I changed the way I looked at life. I think it's possible to do that. The delicate part of that is it's for someone listening who's depressed. It sounds like, how come you haven't done it? It's possible to do it. And then it's like
the possibility versus probability thing. Yeah.
So it becomes it's almost discouraging, and it almost sounds invalidating to say, I think you could change this. But that's the nature. Like, to me, it's actually why the field of marriage and family therapy came into being, was because at the time, psychiatrists and psychologists were kind of like, I mean, we're just kind of telling people like, oh, this is just what it is for you. And we can't really change this stuff. And then marriage and family therapy is like, well, what if we work with the whole system and looked at the whole thing differently? And so it started to shift the way they did things. So I think maybe it's just, I want to believe it's possible.
I think it's possible, but more in the sense of like an analogy I use a lot is like weeds, right? Like maybe your patch of ground, just, biologically and for other reasons, like you just had a lot more, whatever you call the seeds of weeds would be seeds. Maybe you just started off with a lot more seeds in your plot of ground. So you have a lot more weeds kind of temperamentally and biologically and situationally than other people will. And it's absolutely true that everybody can pull weeds, right?
For sure.
And that, having a plot of land with no weeds is a good thing. It's all true, right? But then it's like, if you're a person who got like 10 seeds, and so every 6 months you just walk through and pluck your 6 weeds and then you can hang out, and you're telling me all you got to do is pull the weeds, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
It's not so hard.
yeah,
It's like mine is
as
all
soon as I
weeds.
grab a weed, another
Yeah.
one's growing, right?
Right.
And so it's exhausting.
Right.
And I think that the same things will be used to pull the weeds for everybody, generally speaking. Like, I mean, I think we know, like,
there's no secret
so
weed puller.
many different ways to kind of deal with negative thought bias and like just emotional work where you're not, becoming overly attached to negative emotions that would, cause you to maybe sink into more of a despair like state, or like motivational issues, or behavioral stuff. It's all the same, right? And I think that's where everybody's like, oh, we're all playing the same game, why are you still sitting the bench, right? And
Right.
And so I think that's where I'm saying, like, the act of pulling the weed
Uh-huh.
and knowing that, like, I just did that and have the capacity to do that. And maybe for me, I'm not looking at this like I'm going to have a weedless plot of land all the time.
Right.
Kind of like that productivity tip where it's like, quit trying to have inbox 0. What's the point of that? Right.
Right.
Like, just don't, like, let certain emails sit there, and if the person really needs you, they'll ping you again. Right. And like, so I think there's certain things where it's like, yeah, that's just going to be that way, and I'm fine with that. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to be, I think that's the other thing too that sometimes happens with depression is like, a lot of people that I've worked with depressed people have way higher expectations for themselves and the world around them than other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, their gap is maybe a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And then other people are kind of like, well, I'm not bothered as much by this.
Yeah.
And I'm functioning at this level, so I don't really feel the...
Right. Which is partly why in the previous episode we talked about depression and anxiety go together so well.
Yeah.
Because that like the standard here, but I'm over here can create an anxiety.
Yeah.
That feels like then I'll never be enough. I'll never complete this. And then it turns into a depression that's like, well, I suck.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that's part of like the weed thing. It's kind of funny. I remember when I very first grew a beard, something else happened to it. There's been times where I'm like, because of the internet now, we can ask basic questions like, how should I be chewing? Like, and there will be an answer. Someone's written like multiple blogs probably on like,
at a cadence of 3 chews for 10 seconds. Yeah.
Which there was that whole thing actually of, the Kellogg guy, the guy who invented cornflakes, he was weird.
Oh yeah.
And he believed in like long mastication. Like you should be chewing the crap out of your food till it basically just dissolves down your throat.
Wow.
Like, and it was like, there's a whole thing. If you read the book, I think it's called Gut. It's by Mary Roach.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote Stiff. A lot of people know that one. It's about what do we do with dead bodies and how do we treat death. She's a fascinating.
Is that the one with the smells?
Yeah,
we're talking about.
Yeah, they have a bloat farm in Tennessee.
Oh.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. She's I think she's also, I don't remember if she's a researcher or a journalist but she writes very humorous, like dark humor about these topics it's also the book Gut. Mm-hmm. It talks about like, if you ask anybody, this is the smells one.
Oh, okay.
Because it was like, if you ask anybody, these people in these labs, what's the thing that smells the worst of the things they have, like feces and bile and urine
that work with dead bodies, or just
no? This one's that works with like stuff inside the body, and we're testing this thing. The one that they will say is always the smelliest, that will make them throw up fastest, is saliva. After it sits, it smells horrifying, apparently.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I told you that, like, they did studies like if
spit
people spit in their soup, that half the people would not eat the soup. It's their own spit, but they're like, I'm not eating that soup anymore. It's like, it just came out of your mouth. But
we probably talked about this before. Remember those kids that used to like spit and let it like string all the way to the ground and then suck it back up?
Yeah, you do that when you're sitting
wanted to puke every time I saw that. Or people that do it with ketchup, and
you do it with Skittles because you drink Skittles Mountain Dew and it gets really, really stringy spit. And then you pin your brother down and you spit and then
suck it right back up. That's called saliva boarding.
So, crap, where were we?
You were talking about gut, weeds.
How did I get? Oh, the weed thing. Like, I think about this idea in the context of like, I've always had this thing in my head, like diagnoses have their benefit, especially in terms of helping people feel like, okay, I'm not crazy. There is something going on with me. But you have to to me, it's like, that's about as far as it should go. And then knowing like, okay, I need to this is the way that my brain works, which that's not necessarily a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like my brain works this way. Like I think about Mike, who's not here, so I'll talk about him. It's like he has always been, I think he said this, he's been more sensitive than me. And I think that's not necessarily a problem. It's just, I mean, it can be a problem if you're a dude in our society, but it's just like, well, that's just the way my brain, I know that about me. Like I was told recently twice in a week when I was like, am I? By a client that was like, twice essentially by a client and by a different therapist that said, Rob's blunt. It's like, am I? I went home and asked my wife, I was like, am I blunt? She's like, what? No. I was like, okay. I mean, in therapy, I will be very direct.
Yeah.
To me, that's very different than blunt. And actually, the things I was told I was blunt about is like, I was just describing your guys' pattern. I wasn't saying like, and you look fat in those pants. But just that idea of like, oh, like if I was blunt, I'd think, okay, that's something I know about me. I want to work on that. So like this weed thing is saying, hey, look, this is my plot. I'm not looking over at somebody else's plot and thinking, well, they only have 6 weeds.
Yeah.
Because we've also talked about this before. Comparison, we already, all humans in theory know there's no point in it.
Yeah.
Either you're looking better than somebody else, which how good is that? You're disconnecting yourself from your fellow human, or you feel like crap compared to somebody else, which is usually what happens.
Yeah.
And what good does that do? Instead of saying, okay, look, I have these weeds. This is how I know I have these weeds. So this is how I deal with it. It's not so much saying, well, I am depressed and I will be forever depressed. It's saying, I know I have these weeds. So that's, to me, if we've kind of narrowed that down as we broaden that bad boy up, is thinking, okay, well then what are your like top 1 or 2 things that you'd say, these are the things, like I'll tell you the things that Jordan Peterson said he asks everyone that I liked, that I was like, oh, I don't think I asked those, but not in the way he does. Said the first question he asked is, do you have a job? Which is interesting because he said in our society, if you don't have a job, you won't do very well.
Yeah.
Which is totally true. We're not a forgiving society in that way.
Yeah. And everything that we value costs money.
Right. And all, and for men in particular, your identity is wrapped into it. I talked with somebody recently about their dad who was a stay-at-home dad kind of because it made more sense. But you could tell he was really struggling with the fact that he's just staying at home, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But so that was one of the questions he asked. Another one was, I can't remember what the second question was, but actually, so I don't know why I say that, but
you said, well, maybe it's tied up in the job, but like, do you have a purpose? Are you?
He mentions having a purpose, and that's one of the things that there are a couple of things that I ask. I don't ask about job, although I like that because it's tangible. I usually ask, do you have a routine? What's your routine? And then I'll talk about structure. Like everybody needs, as much as we don't like structure sometimes, we don't want to be so rigid that it's like every day I have to eat oatmeal at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
The structure feels like, okay, there are certain things I can put on autopilot. And it gives me like, I don't have to wake up and think, well, what is this? I don't have to think about things. They're just going to happen. Now, yeah, you can end up in a rut. If you are too rigid about the structure or too specific about the structure. So like if my structure is generally speaking, I go to bed, my wife and I generally go to bed, almost always go to bed at the same time. We just hang out until it's time to go to bed. And then we will, like we're generally going to bed around 9:45 to anywhere between 9:45 to 10:30-ish.
And what time do you get up?
5.
Man, how do you do that?
What do you mean?
Well, I don't want to get derailed on this, but like if I'm not, like I get up, probably the most consistent time I get up is 6:30. But more often than not now, like I'm like, I want to be in my bed at 9, knowing that I'm going to watch something and fall asleep, ideally between 10 and 10:30.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it pushes into like, 11:30, waiting for kids to wrap up all their
I don't do that
stuff. Well, I try not to, but I'm just kind of like still like,
like
thinking about they're not going to get enough sleep, and telling them like you need to get to bed and stuff. But I'm like, I would much rather be getting up, ideally between 5 and 5:30 and falling asleep. So I guess okay. So if you're falling asleep at like 10:30, I guess then
What, honestly, for me, and we have a TV in our room, but I don't know why. We never watch it.
No, I fall asleep
And
with
so-
it on, man. I put the timer on.
And I won't do that because I've read too much stuff about that. That's like,
Yeah.
you're wiring your brain awake. And so
it wires
like
my brain asleep.
when I go to bed, I will I go in and my poor wife, she has a long routine,
Mhm.
but I go in and I like take my contacts out, brush my teeth, and I'm in bed and I wait for her, but
Mhm.
then I am out. Like I put my head down and I'm out.
Mhm.
Like within
Well,
5.
yeah, if you're getting up and exercising every morning, and yeah.
So like that, and that's part of my structure. And the routine of this, the structure of it is not, like there are days when I'm like, I don't want to go running today, or I don't want to wake up. And so I don't wake up.
Yeah.
Or like this morning, most mornings my alarm goes off at 5, and then I have
Mhm.
one that goes off at 5:02 just to make sure I'm not, because I used to be great. I would just spring right out of bed, but I do
First
not do that
one's
anymore.
Rob. Second one's, hey, Rob.
Exactly. Dude, seriously?
It's 2 minutes later.
And then I'll lay there for, like this morning, I laid there for 20 minutes.
Mhm.
Just laying there doing nothing,
Mhm.
thinking, which I'm trying to train myself out of because that is not good for me.
Yeah, sitting
That's
there
my
just
worst-
thinking about your day.
That's my worst time to do that.
Mhm.
I can do it fine at other times of the day. I think much more clearly, but in that time, it's terrible for me. So I need to take that part out of my structure.
Mhm.
But that structure every day that I do, and even having my clients scheduled pretty consistently,
Mhm.
is there's just certain things that I know, okay, these are the things I go and do, and this is the stuff I can count on.
Yeah.
So that's to me important because it's
Mhm.
like it does give me a sense of discipline.
Mhm.
And I do one of the things we've talked about in previous episodes is that when I talk with people about depression, it's like I don't have a quick fix for you because I don't
Yeah.
think there is one.
Mhm.
It's a little bit, we could use your weed thing. Mine is like, if you're in a hole, we're
Mhm.
not jumping out of the hole and I'm not throwing you a rope.
Mhm.
I'm going to get in the hole with you. And then we're going to start I usually, for some reason, use bricks. Like we're going to start laying bricks down
Yeah.
and making a staircase out.
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you to do things. And you'll be like, what? That didn't do anything. I'm like, well, you put another brick in place. So let's move to the next brick.
Yeah.
Because it's just a process of doing these things
Mhm.
in order to, because I think part of that change is changing your thinking to say, my goal is not to be
Mhm.
lighthearted and whatever, like my goal is to be like, oh, I know what my circumstances are and
Mhm.
I'm okay with these. And actually I like my plot of ground.
Yeah.
So that's that structure thing is one of the first things I ask about. But the second part is, and this one kind of stumps people a lot, is asking that question of like, well, what's your purpose? Like, what's your meaning in life?
Mhm.
Kind of like Viktor Frankl's, it's not about man's search for happiness. It's man's search for meaning.
Mhm.
We won't be happy if we don't have meaning.
Yeah.
So life is supposed to be depth,
Mhm.
not just happy.
Mhm.
So knowing like, what's my purpose? And most people honestly I don't feel like I get good answers to that question.
Mhm.
Sometimes I get generic ones, like from religious clients, I'll get like, well, I'm a child of God or something like that. It's like, okay,
That's your identity, not your purpose.
yeah. And also
yeah.
it probably doesn't mean a lot to you.
Yeah.
It's just something you've repeated to yourself over and over, but not like I have this sense of purpose.
Mhm.
And that's a question I have. And maybe because I want to know what other things you would say, this is a question I ask, or this is where I go. But do you feel like, because to me, I guess I'll say this first, what to me purpose would be is not necessarily like, well, I am, my purpose is to be a father. That could be one, right?
Mhm.
Or my purpose is I'm here to make money and whatever.
Yeah.
Like purpose could just be, one thing that is meaningful to me and purposeful is I try to connect with other people each day.
Mhm.
Like I want to do more of a lunch when I'm messing with that lady because I think probably that lady now is going to have a different kind of day just because we joked with her a little bit.
I'm glad you brought that full circle to what we actually did, because it sounded real weird at the beginning. Got lunch when we messed with that lady.
I just asked her at the end
Yeah.
because it was a pay at the end kind of place.
Yeah.
And I was like, what would you do if because I sat there sitting at lunch thinking, what if we just took off running?
Yeah.
Is she going to chase us down? And then I thought, we could just run off.
Yeah.
Not that I was going to, but then I was like, so I asked her.
That guy would have thrown his bucket of onions at us.
I like there was just a big bowl of onions sitting right next to the grill. I just chuck onions whenever I need to. But anyway, so like that kind of stuff, I feel like it helps me because it feels like it's kind of fun to joke around with people.
Mhm.
But probably it's going to make her day go differently too.
Yeah.
And so part of it's not like my purpose is to bring joy to other people. That could be a way I phrase it, but it's like I just like connecting with other people
Mhm.
because I think life is just a collection of experiences.
Mhm.
And so why shouldn't I have more? That's why I envy comedians, because comedians are always looking for material.
Yeah.
So they're like talking to people all the time and
Mhm.
mess, because it's like, well, this will be material for my new joke. I just saw a thing with Nate Bargatze
Mhm.
where he was like running in the morning, like before a show, and he started to feel numbness and tingling. So they had a doctor come in. It's just some dude wearing like a hoodie, and he's like, "Who are you?" You
They
know,
had him
he's
come in like on his set.
like before the set.
Oh, okay.
He's like, "Can I still do my show tonight? It's a big stadium tour." And it's like, guy, just give him some pills. He's like, guy, and later that night they're showing him doing the set. He's like, "Yeah, you guys as doctors here, man. I don't know about that." The guy just gives me some pills out of his pocket, and I just took them. You know, like, I think there's always material, but
Yeah.
so. And like, I don't think I get to decide for somebody what their purpose is. I do think there are things from what we've said in previous episodes too about purpose. This is the way I would phrase it: is purpose is connected to that idea of like altruism.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think my perspective on life is that we are here to connect to each other relationally in various forms to learn. And I think that progresses us forward as humans in terms of our own sense of self and our sense of differentiation. But I also think that helps other people do the same. And in the end of life, that's what we talk about anyway, is the meaning that we got from this stuff. So that one's valuable to me, and making someone think about that, to say, you can't just do this thing all day if it's pointless. It has to be, there's some reason I'm doing this. So it was a long, I don't even know what that was.
That was you talking about purpose.
Yeah. But do you have like an answer to that? Or what are your things that you'd say, I would ask these questions, or I try to point people in this direction for depression?
Well, I don't want to overlap with everything you said, because I agree with all that. I think that's all probably stuff that gets overlooked when it comes to depression, because we go internal so much with it, because we've thought about it medically for so long.
Right.
So yeah, I guess to add to the purpose, I find that it's like this could be built into routine or job or relationships, but yeah, where am I like useful to those around me, which is a tricky one nowadays, because I think we probably erroneously assume that the answer to problems like depression is to back up, you know?
What do you mean?
Like back away from like commitments, relationships.
Yeah, that's actually something Jordan Peterson talks about, that like you have to engage more socially.
Yeah, and I think that,
which is hard for people who are depressed.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think that just like when you're sick with anything, yes, you need some level of pulling back and rest.
Right.
But like, I think we have to be really, really conservative with that, and really intentional about it, because it's kind of like, to use the hole analogy, right? You're wanting out of that hole, right?
Right.
But you're tired, and maybe you've been clawing at the walls and trying to climb up it and feel like you're in the same spot. So like laying down and catching your breath in the dirt, totally appropriate, right? Yeah. Carving out with your shovel, I guess that you didn't have in the first part of my analogy. Which sometimes people hand you shovels around this stuff. Hey, why don't you carve yourself a little bed right here? And why don't you, start to dig a little bit deeper here? And, like, because what, the sunlight's kind of peeking in over here. So why don't you keep digging? Like, I think a lot of advice unintentionally sends that message, like back up further, retreat further.
Yeah.
And while that does feel, while you feel temporary relief from that, I think it just like,
so you're just digging a new hole inside the hole.
Yeah. So I would be really, like you're saying, it's not so much that like, you should move forward and be able to do that right away.
Right.
But I think that's why things like depression are like, the people around you and the relationships around you are critical at a time like this, as an example, right? Like you need, maybe in some situations, you need somebody who's going to show up at your house and say, hey, we work out in the morning.
Yeah.
And the awkwardness of like leaving me hanging at your door at 5 a.m. might end up factoring in, in a more negative way to you than the reward of staying in bed.
Yeah.
And that'll get you out the door.
Yeah.
And something about our conversation will lift you a little bit. The exercise will get your heart pumping, and afterward, it's pretty unlikely that you'll be like, I'm really upset that I did that. Right. You might not be like, you won't be like, oh my gosh, that changed everything.
Right.
But you'll probably be able to say, part of me feels good that I was able to do that. And now I'm closer to you because you understood me and, you were there for me in an important way. So like relationally, I think that's hugely important. And I think when you can get to a place of saying, how can I be useful? How can I give back? Right? How can I contribute? You're going to start to feel even more able to get out of that hole. But internally, this is a really hard one to implement. But like, if you can do this to any extent, it's like worth its weight in gold. Stop thinking.
Oh, dude, I just had a conversation with my wife like last night saying
Mm-hmm.
we think too much as humans.
Yeah. I think that is the whole in a way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like I go into my mind and understandably, I wanted to do an episode on this, but now I'm like, I think that would just be like one of those mysteries of the universe episodes. So I think I might be the only one that enjoys it, but like
I love this.
listeners will probably be like, yeah, whatever. But
They listen to me forever. They're like, please give us something real.
but it's like, why do we ask why?
Yeah.
And I think I told you about that with like the study with like the chimpanzees and the toddlers where they had this like L-shaped block.
Mm-hmm.
And so the chimps and the toddlers were just trying to stand it up, but since it's L-shaped, standing it up with like the bottom part of the L on top, so it kept falling over, and the chimp just kept like, come on, just setting it down the same way over and over and over again, and just like
getting angry,
just like trying to get it to work.
Yeah.
And the toddler, after a few times, was like, what is this thing, and why does it keep tipping over, right? And like looking at it and trying to figure it out. So it's a huge advantage that our brains work that way.
For sure.
But when it comes to problems like this, the why of depression,
right?
That's where you will go and spend a ton of time. Like, it's because you're a piece of crap, and it's because you'll start to kind of judge yourself based on all that things that other people might be telling you that could be helpful, but maybe or it's true, but it's just not helpful in the way it's delivered.
Right.
And I think if you can, if you're going to spend any time in your head, like limit it to what based questions, how based questions, and maybe where based questions, right? So what am I doing, right? Without any judgment about it, right? Just how can I get to where I can lay this next brick, right? And where do I need to be doing that, spending my time, who needs to be around me, all that stuff. And I think why is just, it just sends you like deeper and deeper and deeper. So
because you're asking,
start going down that path. If you can, there's this real technical intervention called thought stopping. I love it because it's just like, yeah, right, dude. Like that just goes on. Like for most people you talk to with anxiety or depression, it's just like, I can't shut that off. Like that's where it's always there. Trust me, I try. It doesn't work, right? But I think that like movement and action and distraction, like healthy distraction, like manageably sized commitments, like you're saying, jobs, routines, like I think that gets you out of your head enough that you're just present, right? And your head's kind of like almost like the biggest thing dragging you down.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because I've been talking about this more with clients since our last episode too, of like, like sometimes you just need to go exercise or like, don't think about something, just go do this thing. And thinking how often we spend time trying to figure something out when there's nothing to be figured out. Like, look, that just is something. Now go over here and do this. And as soon as you do that, your head's in a different spot. Like me laying in bed in the morning, thinking through my day does me no good.
Yeah. Because how are you thinking about it?
Right. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
It's negative thinking and it's all going to suck. And it's going to be, instead of like, just get up. And then my brain functions a little differently. And I'll be like, I'll just do this with this client or whatever, So I think it's something very valuable, which is why they say all the time, go exercise. It's also why I think it's like that why thing becomes like a weird loop. Why? Well, because I'm depressed. It's like, that's why I have such a hard time with the diagnosis sometimes, is because it becomes like, this is my reason why, and also my reason why not. Like, this is why I'm not going to do something, because it's like, well, you just have to go do it. It sounds very almost in the way our culture functions now, it's almost insensitive to say, well, so you got to go do it. Like it's like the other activity that's like acting as if, which is like fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And it's funny how often I can sit with clients and I'll ask questions about, I'll say something like, well, I think this and this, and and then I'll pause and say, you just thought, no, that's not true because I suck. And then I go, oh, how'd you know that? I'm like, because it's just human experience.
Yeah.
Like I keep thinking about this more and more when I work with clients too, is feeling like it all comes down to kind of these same, like, are you doing certain things that we know about humans are good for humans? And half the time, that's why Jordan Peterson starts with like, do you have a job? Like, this is good for humans. Are you doing it? And if the answer is like, well, I can't get a job, it's like, you have to go get one. Like you can't see, he even said, he's like, even if it's a job you hate, it's like, start somewhere.
Yeah.
That's just a brick. You're not going to stay there forever. But you do have to shift that thinking of that. That's a really good point to say, don't ask the why. Because especially, it's like asking, I don't know, there's probably some deeper metaphor for this, but like somebody with poop colored goggles on. Why is it like this? Because everything's colored like poop.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, don't ask the guy with those goggles.
I also think it gives you an illusion that when you find the answer to that question, the solution will be easy.
Yeah, that's what people do. Yeah. They're like, I want to dig into my childhood. I'm like, okay, why? They're like, well, I feel like once I kind of figure this out, things will click. And I'm like, and I said just this last week, I said, just so you know, when we figure this out, first of all we're doing is highlighting patterns and seeing how they play out now. You're still going to struggle in relationships. He's like, well, then why am I here? I was like, he was just kidding. But I was like, that's exactly what I mean, man. Like, there is no unlocking things. It is, it's a matter of like, you have to go do these things and recognizing, like, I actually think everybody's got weeds. I will admit though, you're right. There are some people where I look and think, dude, it looks like you're just way
more prone to negative.
It looks like, it looks like you only got weeds, you know, like you didn't get anything else. But I do think we all have more weeds than we think we do. You know, other people have more weeds than they think.
Yeah, maybe some people are just throwing more dirt on top of their weeds. There's nothing there.
Right. Nothing. So I think what's tricky about this too, though, is it is tricky with depression. But that's my kind of take home, is like, there is a degree of like, well, you have to just kind of get involved in these things and start acting, like doing the things that you want to do. Too much. I've recognized in my own therapy with clients that I'm spending sometimes too much time in the cognitive realm of like highlighting and pointing out and seeing, do you see this? And because I don't call it thought stopping, but I'll say, I want you to catch when you're doing these things. You know, because I want you to catch when you are thinking this way. As a way of, I just want them to be aware of like, oh, I just thought this way. I don't want them to figure anything out, but I want you to notice when I slipped into, oh, I suck. That's why. And be like, oh, I just did that again. Just so you can be aware. But then you end up in that kind of the business term analysis paralysis, like where I think maybe I just need to have people do more. Like I've thought more and more about exercise. Like maybe I need to have couples go on a walk together and then talk or whatever. So I think that's really valuable to say the how and the what. That's good, Matt. I think you cured it today.
I thought you were going to say on the Manspace.
On the Manspace. Yeah. So, spacemen, do you have any final thoughts, Matt? Or is that what it was a pretty good final thought.
I'm just staring at the jellyfish.
They're still there? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
They should look hypercolor on my screen right now.
That's our fake fish tank.
They're purple. On mine, they look blue.
Yeah, they look blue on when I'm looking there, too. There's blue ones, too. Purple and blue.
Our poor people who are... Now, this is just a teaser why you guys should watch on YouTube. Now you can see.
You can only see the jellyfish on YouTube.
It's a special subscriber option. You can see the jellyfish. We're not talking about Mike. So, come back. Oh, well, nope, too late. I was going to say come back, but you'll not until after Thanksgiving. But then I realized we should have said that in the episode that posted today. This episode will post after Thanksgiving. Hope everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving.
Oh, right.
We sure did.
Maybe we'll serve you up a plate of man nuggets for Thanksgiving.
Ooh, man nuggets. Prepare yourselves. Next time on the Manspace. Just the two of us. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Please remember to
rate
and
review.
Please, we desperately need it.